Hello, everybody. A very good afternoon to all of you from UNESCO New Delhi, and welcome to this special edition of webinars to mark the 10th anniversary of the UNESCO recommendation on historic urban landscape, which is being organized by UNESCO New Delhi and the National Institute of Urban Affairs of India in close cooperation with the Center for Environmental Planning and Technology, Ahmedabad, and Metropolis. The recommendation on historic urban landscape adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO on 10th of November 2011, which is exactly 10 years ago, calls on member states, UNESCO's member states, to integrate conservation and management of cultural heritage and cities and settlements with policies and practices for sustainable urban development. As this special edition of webinars are targeted to initiated audience, such as architects, urban planners, academics, as well as municipalities and urban development of states, it won't be necessary for me to make an introduction on what is UNESCO's historic urban landscape. Rather, I'd like to frame this special webinars with a broader picture about the international setting, which will hint us where the UNESCO recommendation can be positioned. Maybe Yashraj, you can just share the one page of PowerPoint about some details. Yes. So first of all, it is important, it is not a page. And yeah, please, yeah. Yes, so first of all, it is important to recall that since the adoption of the recommendation, many prominent international agendas have been put in place, such as UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, UN Habitat-New Urban Agenda, which came in 2016, and the Paris Agreement 2015. Yes, so the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, UN Habitat Agendas, and then Paris Agreement. The rapid urbanization continues at an unprecedented scale, very often with uncontrolled development, transforming urban areas and cities unsustainable. And at the same time, the risks of climate-related disasters are increasing. In this context, the recommendation is more relevant and urgent today than ever. It is also useful to mention at this stage that UN 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda is actually the first UN document acknowledging the role of cultural heritage to sustainable development. Secondly, from the World Heritage perspective, World Heritage Committee, since the adoption of this recommendation, has been strongly encouraging its state parties to use the recommendation as a tool for conservation and management of their World Heritage site. Actually, more than 70% of cultural heritage properties inscribed on the World Heritage list are either located in urban areas or have urban elements within their nominated boundaries. Historic cities and urban areas are among the cases most frequently examined by the World Heritage Committee, at least since 2000. As they are often the most challenging in terms of management and protection. In average, more than 50% of all state of conservation reports on the list World Heritage properties related to heritage in urban areas. Yashraj, I think the page is not up to date. This actually reflects the complexities of reconciling urban development with heritage conservation. The main recurring factors affecting the properties are inadequate management plans, need for housing, and inadequate legal frameworks or violation of legal provisions. Thirdly, it is also important to underline that the recommendation is actually built on previous recommendations and charters, such as the UNESCO recommendation concerning the safeguarding and the contemporary role of historic areas, which is dated 1976, Washington Charter, 1987, and the document on authenticity, so-called Nara Declaration, dated of 1994. And finally, it comes the Bukhara Charter from the Australia ICOMOS. This document traces the evolution of our notion on what is cultural heritage, along with its authenticity as well as integrity. For example, the historic cities was not considered as a cultural heritage even 50 years ago. So I'd like to invite all the students in architecture or urban planning connected to our webinar today to read at least once these documents. Last but not least, it is very important to highlight that the recommendation fully integrates the intangible cultural heritage value as well as the contemporary buildings in its approach. In this context, the recommendation is often referred to as a tool for historic cities to manage the dynamic process of the evolution of cities, but also in their embracement for contemporary elements within the historic cities. This actually makes the recommendation very much complementary to the World Heritage Convention, because these elements, the intangible values as well as the contemporary elements, have their places within the World Heritage context in a strict manner. So these are the four elements which we consider a very important setting surrounding the historic urban landscape. Now, in principle, we should have the congratulatory remark from our director, Mr. Eric Bolt, who is in Paris, who was supposed to join us from Paris, but at this moment there is a general conference which is taking place, which actually opened yesterday, and we got the news that it won't be possible to be connected with us today. So he sends his best regards to all of us and the best wishes for the success of the webinar. Therefore, without further delay, we can now start the presentation of cases. Today, we have 4 cities that are all in the list of World Heritage. We are pleased to have the cities of Paramaribo or Suriname, secondly, Bukhara from Uzbekistan. Third cities is Berat and Geracastra from Albania. And the last the case studies is from Valletta in Malta. So without further delay, I'd like to invite Dr. Epich to share his experience in the World Heritage City of Paramaribo. Dr. Epich, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Junhee, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Again, thank you for this invitation. I believe that case studies are the best way that we can understand what's happening in other cities and how they are implementing or trying to implement the historic urban landscape approach. Junhee, I was excited when Junhee invited me to this because I've been working in a number of cities, also with some of the other panelists. And so it's been a real privilege to share some of these experiences. Since I'm the first speaker, I've decided to add a couple of slides about HUL. And in my experience, and I've worked on a range of things in my professional career, from single archaeological sites to fortresses to cities. And I think cities are the most difficult to try and conserve because you have a living thing and you have many different stakeholders and many different interests that often compete. So it's very difficult to try and conserve a city or conserve the values of a city. And cities are always changing. and they take a lot of time. I'm an architect, and I often complain that a single project may take 2 or 3 years to see tangible results, but a city, it may take 20 or 30 years to see tangible results. So I hope we can have this exact same conference in another 10 years, and maybe as an idea, revisit these same cities to see what progress has been made. I think a lot of progress has been made in 10 years, but I think more is to come, because 10 years in the lifespan of a city is very short. Junhee mentioned earlier that there's a lot of pressure on historic cities. A lot of people, the world is becoming more urbanized, and people are moving to cities. In my example, in Paramaribo in Suriname, it's the opposite, where people are moving out of the city. And this is often the case in the United States, where I'm from, where a lot of the people are abandoning this historic core of the city. So it's a different set of challenges. So I think we have to look at both situations: a good economy where people are moving to the city, or a bad economy where people are moving out and the businesses are moving out. Even with those two different types of scenarios, I think that there's a lot of potential in historic cities. People generally like to live in a historic city. There's a connection with the past, there's a connection between families, there's a collection or a cluster of businesses, and a high concentration of human capital and creativity. So I was really excited to hear about HUL even more than 10 years ago. So of course, what is HUL? It's an approach rather than a new category. It recognizes, which is important, it recognizes that cities must be evolving and dynamic and living. And I think that it's important to recognize that it's to manage change rather than to only preserve the past. And I'm glad that a lot of the panelists are more or less younger. I'm not exactly young, but I think I have this fight with older professionals because they do like to freeze the past. So I think that the HUL is a breakthrough in that. And it allows for the preservation of the values rather than just the historic fabric. A last slide about HUL is to address the broader context, embodies the intangible as well as the tangible, and it treats everything as a whole. Junhee mentioned earlier that even 50 years ago, I think our profession was focused on a single building or a monument, archaeological site, and now the definition has expanded, and we're really overlapping a lot with planners and urban designers. So I'm really encouraged to share the HUL approach with other parallel professions such as planners or urban designers. Okay, to start my case study, I was privileged enough in 2018, 2019, and even until today to be involved in the World Heritage City of Paramaribo in the New World, in the Western Hemisphere, in a small nation called Suriname. And there's only about 500,000 people in Suriname, so it's a very small country and a very small city. It's only the only cultural World Heritage site in the country, and it was quite a struggle for them to get it on the World Heritage list, and they're dealing with it. It's a very beautiful city. It was founded by the Dutch in the 17th century. And then it was transferred to the English, and then became the Dutch again. And strangely enough, the Dutch chose to keep Suriname over New York City, and they seceded New York City to the British. I think it was not the best bet, but it was the city was successfully nominated to the World Heritage List in 2002 after a long process of almost 8 or 9 years. So they're very proud that they've achieved this status, and they want to keep the status. So there's a lot of things going on. It was nominated for criteria 2 and criteria 4. It's a wooden city because there's a lot of raw building material. It borders on an incredible forest. 80% of Suriname is a native forest. So there's a lot of raw material in wood, and that has its own problems. It's also been nominated for criteria 4 because it's a fusion between European culture and native culture, and it's represented in the architecture, the wooden architecture. it is faced with a lot of problems, from flooding to fire. It was built on a series of ridges made of shells, but it's still very low lying. And there's a lot of concern about climate change because it frequently floods. To bring this back into the HUL, part of my work there in developing the management plan was to recover the historic canals, which were dug by the British and the Dutch, and which have since been abandoned. So that's another aspect to addressing the disasters. It also suffers a lot from fire, and of course, termites and insects, because it is a wooden city. It suffers a lot from traffic because it was the historic center of culture and the city. But now a lot of the people, if you want to cross from the north to the south side of the city, you have to cross through the historic center. And this causes a lot of trouble. When I was working there, I was really shocked by the emptiness that the city had. There's a number of government offices in the city. And at 3 o'clock, when the government closes, 3 in the afternoon, the city is like a ghost town. And this was really quite depressing. And part of our work with the management plan was to uncover why it became such an empty city. Fortunately, I was there for Diwali, which is a big festival because there's a lot of people from your part of the world that live in Paramaribo. And so I happened to be there during this festival, and I said, this is some hope. There's some hope in the city, because even if during the week the city is empty, or during the weekends, at least it's still regarded as the cultural center and the festivals that happen there. So there's Diwali, there's a number of other festivals, including New Year's. It's a big festival, which has its own problems because they like to celebrate with fireworks, which are not good for wooden buildings. But I was fortunate enough to be there for many festivals, and we did a map and a calendar of all the different festivals. So this gave us some hope. It's also home to a lot of other aspects, a little bit, some intangible, such as very good food, which are inspired by your part of the world. Very, very good food. It has a high tolerance for religion. The picture on the upper right, you can take a picture of a mosque next to a synagogue. And right across the street, you can't get it in the same picture, is a Catholic church. And then down the street is a Presbyterian church. So there's a lot of tolerance for religion in this part of the world. As part of the management plan, we did some mapping, some GIS. As important as this physical mapping and understanding the relationship between the physical spaces, such as the canals and the historic architecture and historic core, was a mapping of the structure and decision-making to understand what works and what doesn't work and who reports to whom. We did a similar mapping to this, which was, this is the mapping of how it is, but we did the mapping of what it should be in order to break through some political and administrative barriers. We also did an in-depth investigation of the financial challenges of the city and why the city was completely empty, why no one lives there. And we investigated the tax rates, the exchange of property rates, which is very high, up to 11.5% of the value of the property, interest rates, which are extremely high, and the restoration rates. So these are some of the barriers as to why the city was becoming empty and some buildings were falling into disrepair. Some of the good practices, not necessarily associated with our management plan, but some of the good practices are that with support of the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, there was a big study by the Urban Lab about housing in the city, and housing has declined dramatically in the city. And there was a very good proposal to insert housing and redevelop historic buildings into housing. And this would bring some of the life back into the historic city. There was also a very good report by EDM on mobility. In order to facilitate the access to people with cars, the only way really to move around in Suriname is by car. There is some bus traffic, but really the best way is by car. So to sensitively insert parking lots, to reroute the traffic, and to give a hierarchy to the traffic in the historic center. I think this was very insightful. There was also an environmental social impact assessment sponsored by IDB concerning the historic center. And another aspect that we investigated was why some of the buildings are left abandoned. And one of the critical issues was that over the generations, it gets left, the house or the property gets left to a number of different people through the generations. So some houses have 16 or more than 30 owners, and none of the owners, the descendants of the original property owner, can agree on anything. So we looked at the case study of Curacao, another World Heritage City, and the government in Curacao devised a law that said once you announce that the property will be condemned in order to be sold and renovated, after a certain period of time, if their descendants don't reply, then the government can condemn the property and begin the process of regeneration. Some other good practice aspects, there was a report by Dennis Rodwell, a retrofit manual. So a manual in order to guide people in order to recover the historic properties. Another aspect was connection with the National Tourism Plan. Not only was the city empty at 3 in the afternoon because the government workers left, but it was also devoid of any tourism. And only 8 or 9 blocks away, there was a very lively part of the new city, which I couldn't understand because it was away from the river, it was away from any ambiance historic structures. So working with the tourism officials, which don't really understand our world, but working with them to try and improve the tourism in the city. Finally, one good practice, which was highlighted a few years ago as a good practice for the implementation of HUL, was the Stasserstad. It's a private company which is established as a public-private partnership between the government and a foundation and private investors, and they buy a building, historic building, and they conserve it and renovate it, and then sell it in order to generate surplus revenue in order to buy another building. And this process was exported from Amsterdam, where it was very, very successful. Now, it's had some limited success in Paramaribo. They only own about 4 or 5 properties, and they've been in operation for about 8 years now. But it's a very good model for attending to buildings which have been neglected or properties which have been neglected. And I think it has more potential in cities which have a population pressure, where people are moving to the city rather than away from the city. And it's also had some limited impact because the transfer exchange rate is so high. And I spoke with the director of this foundation, and he said if we could eliminate the transfer tax of 11.5%, they would be much more profitable. And this also it allows people, normal investors, to kind of take part in it. They also have a very good set of people that are really well trained, that are working with the SGES as the administrator or manager of the World Heritage property. And finally, we have the management plan, which was our responsibility to understand some of these challenges, understand some of the problems, and then try to connect all of the different studies together. Now, I understand there was an election cycle, and then there was COVID. So the implementation of the management plan is just now getting underway again. And I understand that the management plan has been sent to the World Heritage Center in UNESCO. So I'm still in touch with the SGES to monitor the situation. but I'm hoping to get some good feedback from UNESCO. So in conclusion, I think Paramaribo is a very unique place, as most places are on the World Heritage List, but it has some really common problems. But fortunately, they have some good institutions which are well connected to UNESCO, they're well connected to ICOMOS, and they have some very dedicated people. They have this foundation, which I mentioned, public-private partnership, and they're gaining traction on this, and they're developing, they're not developing high profit, but they are developing surplus revenue in order to maintain their properties and continue to buy other properties. They've recognized the need to incorporate new buildings and new housing sensitively inside the historic center. I think this is very important, especially for a city which is empty. They've created a mobility plan, which I think is important for historic cities. Typically, when historic cities are not built for modern buses and modern traffic and trucks. So this, I think, was very important. And an important part of the mobility plan was a hierarchy of the different traffic that needs to access the city center. There's been some regeneration of individual buildings, some movement with pocket parks, and the development of empty lots into small parks so that the city is a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. And then finally, understanding the financial barriers and the tax structure and the political and organizational challenges. Final conclusion. I have to stress that historic cities are really, really difficult to manage change, because change takes forever and there's a lot of stakeholders. I really prefer to work on archaeological sites where there's many fewer stakeholders and it's more or less frozen in time. It's much easier to work with drainage and protection of mosaics or archaeological sites than dynamic cities. But it's a good challenge. There's no easy answers. There's always, I think, going to be imbalances between the future and the past and between conservation and development. And even within our own professional community, there's a lot of interesting discussions about which should be better, the new development or the conservation. I think what makes HUL special is this attempt and recognition to keep these places alive. And the answer lies, I think, in a mixture of solutions, but always trying to engage good people and management. And that's it. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Rand. I think the presentation, of course, the Paramaribo in a certain way is very unique city, but as Rand mentioned, there's also common problems. For example, the gentrification. I recall that another city, another World Heritage city, the old town of Galle from Sri Lanka, faces exactly the same problem, because the resident living inside the city of the Galle, they since the estate rate is increased, and they want to sell their property, and then they are out, and then those from outside people who want to make business, for example, guest houses and hotels, that kind of thing, and come. So the city actually becomes almost the only commercial center, or hotels and business and the guest houses, rather than those who are living there. So, but we all know that the local community resident is very important element to keep the values of World Heritage. I mean, this local community is one of the 5 strategic elements of the World Heritage Committee. And the committee also finds that the World Heritage site without the local communities is quite sad, actually. And then what is the point of having a heritage is to give the place of heritage in the people's life. So this is essence of the Heritage Convention. That's why this preventing gentrification is also part of management, but of course it is a big challenge. And then Rantos mentioned in terms of mobility. Mobility is, of course, especially for historic towns, it's very important. I was in Jaipur, for example, 10 days ago, and within the framework of the special area heritage plan. And this mobility will be also very important part of management plan. So thank you very much, Rand, and for sharing these challenges and the uniqueness. Now
you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we move on to the city of Bukhara. Bukhara is actually one of the very early city which was inscribed on the list of World Heritage, actually 1993. And I understand that there was a minor boundary modification 2016. And we will have Dr. Ona Villaitis, PhD, and then architect from Institute of Archaeology, University College of London. Ona, you have the floor.
Thank you, Juni, and thanks to the UNESCO-New Delhi and the National Institute of Urban Affairs of India for the invitation. I would like to talk today about the historic urban landscape approach to the historic center of Bukhara, and I would like to thank Rand for the introduction about what is the historic urban landscape approach. So I think I'll skip, some of my talk as well. I would like to start with a quote that I like a lot. It is from the La Torre and Nason from the Getty Institute, and it says, "Value has always been the underlying reason for heritage preservation. It is clear that not society strives to conserve what it does not value." And saying this, I would like to say that our main core of work has been always managing change. And Juni already in her introduction talked about some of these documents and strategies that are, there for us so that we can use them and work towards conservation, but also, how to deal with changes, not to stop changes. Before we used to see monuments as something that, nobody could touch. It was, something about conservation or for conservation specialists. But nowadays we see that, especially in cities, cultural heritage, it is part of the society, it is part of the life of people. And here we can see the historic urban landscape approach recommendation from UNESCO. We have the Hangzhou Declaration, and really ongoing is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals, plus, other many tools that are around. We conceive and we have 6 HUL steps, and I would like to focus today in 3 of them, which are the mapping resources, the reaching consensus, and establishing partnerships and management frameworks. Through the case study that will be showing, we somehow touch all of them, the 6 of them, but due to the time limitation, I'll just focus on these 3. So the historic center of Bukhara is located in Uzbekistan. This is, the location is in Central Asia of Uzbekistan along the Silk Roads. The historic center of Bukhara was listed as World Heritage in 1993. So it's one of the let's say, nominations. It does have outstanding universal values, which is really important to understand why the site it is important. And we have been assessing these attributes, what needs to be preserved. It is listed under Criterion 2 with the urban layout and the buildings, Criterion 4, which is a medieval Central Asian town. And this is really important because sometimes when we see cities or we see nominations of the cities in World Heritage, we just focus on the monuments. But in this case, and it's really clear, we go beyond the monuments. We're going, we're seeing a fabric of a city, and also we are seeing in this case the vernacular architecture. Here we have the traditional Bukharian houses that are spectacular, and you'll see some other images about it. And we also have Criterion 6, which is focused on the larger center for Muslim theology. So this we can see why, more than the 200 mosques and madrasas are part of the listing of this site. Clearly, we have some challenges, probably not different than the ones presented before, but the main ones has been that there was no complete baseline information of the whole historic center, an understanding of the values. There's rapid urban development around and within the historic center. And something really crucial is there's lack of awareness about the status of Bukhara's World Heritage. And this is something that it came out of the result of the work we have been doing. I started working in 2010 in the historic center, and back to the previous presentation, I think we are quite connected with branding that everything takes time and cities takes time, and sometimes people are asking for immediate results that are difficult to present. But I think step by step, if we're going towards something good, one day we will reach an ideal status. We need to find a way as well to share all the information and update the information that has been collected through many years. And something really important is we've been working as well, and we drafted a management plan many years ago that needs to be updated and hopefully approved soon. I'll show two initiatives we had related to the documentation, which is the first step. So if we want to understand the cities, we need to understand what we are dealing with, right? This was an initiative supported by the UNESCO Tashkent office, different universities, and the national authorities in Uzbekistan. It took 5 years to survey the whole historic center. With this, it was not only the physical fabric, but also talking to the people, understanding what do they want to do with their houses. This is part of this awareness raising, and how many people are living there. And on the other side, also working on really simple surveying techniques, just to take some measurements of the houses, photography, and then adding this into a database that later help us through the process of the management plan. Important was that we included the community. People were really interested to understand what was happening and why we were doing this. And through this, we involved children in one of the campaigns, where we asked them to draw or write about what is Bukhara for you. It was a really easy but successful activity. And from that, we created, with the support of the UNESCO office in Tashkent, leaflet that was trilingual, and it showed the images and what is Bukhara for children with Patrimonito. On the other side, we work on the attributes in cultural heritage, trying to analyze beyond what they knew. So beyond these monuments, what needs to be protected and how. For that, we use what is called the NARA grid. It is a tool that I've been using for many years, and it helps to exactly understand the attributes of the sites. This was done at different levels, many discussions with large number of stakeholders, including not only people of heritage, but of urban planning, tourism, national authorities, and the communities, the Mahala leaders, who are the leaders of the neighborhoods, let's say. With that, we acknowledge all the attributes that we were listed and are common, but we also acknowledge the urban fabric, the historic houses, the water systems, and irrigation systems that were probably mentioned somewhere in the nomination dossier, but they were never brought back into the management of the site. And as an extra, we also did mapping of all values. That means what are the activities of the city. We had an interesting a kind of workshop on urban planning and also on economics and heritage to understand these activities, also the recreational areas. So we're seeing Bukhara as a city, as a living city, and not only as a number of monuments. Saying this, we mapped more than 4,000 houses, and including also these other features such as the water channels, the pools that are called houses, the streets and green areas. These serve to create thematic maps, and with that we could understand, what is happening. For example, we use this to understand how many houses have been turned into hotels, or how many houses have turned their traditional materials, or actually how many houses have changed completely. And this helped to show with clear data the information to the authorities in order to have a proper planning, infrastructure as well, how many houses have electricity or have sewage system. This was also presented in a round table with the UNESCO office in Tashkent and then Senate of the Republic of Uzbekistan. So we can see that we reach many different levels through the work. And now what is happening, part of two running projects. One is the traditional Bukharian houses. We're doing the conservation guidelines and adaptive reuse for the sustainable management based on the current needs. So we can clearly plan and we can really propose a conservation approach and guidelines for the houses. But if we don't see the reality of what is happening today, it becomes just a book. So the task is not that easy. Hopefully next year we will come with a document that I'll be happy to share with all of you. This has been, this is an ongoing project supported by the World Monuments Fund, and then the International Institute for Central Asian Studies, with collaboration with the Tashkent office and the State University, Bukhara University. For this, we are using also digital technology. We are seeing the mapping. This summer, we mapped Bukhara with a drone, trying to understand the urban fabric. So it's not only just mapping to have a nice 3D, but also to understand how this is working and how the mahalas, the communities, and this urban fabric, it's working. And also we reach a really detailed level doing some laser scanner and photogrammetry within the traditional houses to understand also, changes, and probably go beyond beyond that for structural assessments and condition assessments. And last project that I'm working on currently is through the university, to the University College London. We have the Central Asian Archaeological Landscapes project, and here it's a completely different change of scale. We're mapping whole Central Asia, and part of it is seeing the city. If you see the purple circle, that's Bukhara, but we're also seeing what it goes, beyond the city, and seeing those relationships of all these, all the points you see are archaeological or architectural sites in the oasis of Bukhara. So the scale is completely different. But the important thing is to understanding back to this, what do we have and how this could interact with the historic center, and how this could also affect, it's the topic of climate change that is appearing constantly, and seeing beyond the city, it is quite important. So to conclude, it is really important to understand why and what we have as a first step to protect the cultural heritage. And the mapping project that I showed is a good example, not only of mapping the tangible heritage, but also the intangible, and all values from the community to national higher authorities. We use in this case a GIS, which was really good. We use digital technologies, but it's important to keep in mind that these are only tools. We need really good methodologies that would definitely, will be there regardless what tool. Technologies are changing really fast. And so it is important to choose also the right tools for the right moment, and consider documentation at all the different scales and details. The factors affecting the property are always there and still ongoing. But as we see, there are new partnerships going. We're working towards managing change. And I would like to finalize it saying that definitely we're moving towards something good. And I wouldn't have seen Bukhara without, and Bukhara wouldn't be the same right now without all the work we have been doing for more than a decade. And with this, I would like to thank everyone and hopefully see you all in Bukhara or somewhere else in the world. Thank you, Uni, and thanks to the UNESCO office.
From the previous presentations, I see that there are other historical centers which are facing the same challenges. So it is good to hear and to exchange actually opinions, and also to see what is happening and what are all the activities happening also in other World Heritage sites all over the world. Today I will talk about, yes, actually Geracastra and Berat, they are together in the list of the World Heritage sites, but I will focus more in Geracastra. Since we are in an international context, and maybe some people don't know where Albania is. Albania is this small country located in the southeast Europe, so in the Balkan Peninsula. And it is bordered with Greece, North Macedonia, Kosovo, and Montenegro. Albania is a very rich country when it comes to historical and cultural monuments due to its location in the very important section of the Balkan Peninsula. Many conquerors have passed through the region, leaving their traces of their culture. Albania has approximately 2,000 declared first and second category monuments that are like remains of ancient civilizations, Byzantine and post-Byzantine churches, mosques, old bridges, castle, and vernacular buildings. Albania has also 3 World Heritage sites. The one is Geracastra and Berat that are inscribed together, as I mentioned before. The Butrint archaeological site, and last year it was added also the Albanian part of Ohrid Lake as a natural and cultural site in the World Heritage list. With this video, actually, I'd like to make an introduction to the city of Geracastra, which is an urban preserves actually an urban architectural heritage of the 18th, 19th century town. The castle is overlooking the entire city and stands as an oldest testamental core of the settlement from which the city expanded and developed into 8 residential quarters and the bazaar, which forms nowadays the historical center. Within the historical center, there are many vernacular houses that are designated as first and second category monuments depending on their values. Berat and Geracastra, this is a map of the historical center of Geracastra. Actually, the city was protected really early in a national level. Since 1961, Geracastra and Berat, they were both declared as museum cities. And since 2005, Geracastra is inscribed in the World Heritage list. And then Berat was added in 2008 under the same list in the World Heritage as a World Heritage site. The Geracastra has inside the historical center there are 72 monuments of the first category importance and approximately 300 buildings of a second category. And within the historical center there are almost 1,200 historical buildings. It is a living city, and it is huge. Like there are many buildings, and that's why also challenges are also big. Berat and Geracastra were inscribed in the list based on criteria 3 and 4, and they are inscribed as rare examples of an architectural character typical of the Ottoman period. And the challenges that the city is facing, as I said, are similar also to the other presentations that we heard before. Albania, after in 1990s, before was a communist country, and then after the fall of communism, the country went into many changes, which also affected historical cities like Geracastra. A lot of people moved emigrated into other countries, but also a lot of people are moving to the bigger cities and actually to the capital of Albania. And that's why today we have a lot of historical buildings which are empty and not used. Unsolved property issues are also, and multiple ownership is also a challenge because many actions like restoration and maintenance, it really depends on if the houses are used and on how many owners are in a house. Like we have houses that have up to 70 owners, and it's of course difficult to make all these people together and agree on what to do with the property they have. The deterioration of historical fabric, it's also one of the big challenge because of the change of after the change of the system actually, and the immigration of people and all the changes, political and economical changes in the country, many of the houses left without maintenance, and that's why today we are facing a lot of buildings that are deteriorating. Lack of craftspersons and professional skills is also one of the challenges we are facing. And since Geracastra was inscribed in the World Heritage List in 2005, we have, of course, more attention when it comes to visitors and tourism. And this rise of tourism and related services might be also a challenge and a problem if they are not managed properly. The city is also unprepared, I can say, for disasters and fires has caused a lot of damages to the historical buildings in the city. And mobility, of course, not only because of the landscape and the way the city is built, but because also of the how people are using nowadays more cars, and because of the increase of the numbers of tourism. But there are several projects actually that are implemented in the last years to address these problems in line with the Hul recommendations. I represent today, actually, I work for the Cultural Heritage Without Borders, which is NGO, a non-governmental organization that is dedicated to rescuing and preserving tangible and intangible heritage that is affected by conflicts, neglect, or natural disasters. The organization actually was founded back in 1995 from some Swedish professionals that wanted to react to the destruction of cultural heritage in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the conflict there. But then later they expanded in the whole Balkan region and expanded also their toolbox from the post-war reconstruction to the economical development of the local societies. In Geracastra, the activity of the organization started back in 2007, and one actually of the earliest projects, and which is still continuing, are the regional restoration camps. The regional restoration camps, actually, they started as the idea was to bring together professionals from the countries of the Balkans that were in conflict before, and Albania was actually a neutral ground for these people to meet, to exchange, and to work together. During this and to use in a way cultural heritage as a platform for peace building and reconciliation. Since 2007, we have organized not only in Geracastra but also in other historical cities in Albania and the region, regional restoration camps, and we had more than 1,000 participants coming from 32 different countries. And during this 2 weeks long phase, the students and the young professionals are learning, are taking not only theoretical lectures about the conservation, but also they are working in real monuments, learning about traditional techniques and traditional materials. More than 10 years in Geocastra, CHWB Albania actually has been engaged with more than 80 actually partial and restoration projects in the city, and you can see here some of the photos of before and after of some of the interventions, and some of them were done actually during these regional restoration camps. Together with doing actual works in the building, we work also with studies, assessing actually the condition of the buildings of the whole city, and trying to build strategies and prioritize the intervention. As Ona mentioned before, it is very important to know why and how to intervene. And of course, it's very important to have a general approach, have a big city with many monuments. So with these results from the condition assessment that was done actually in 2014, but then it was repeated in 2017, and we are going to repeat it again and see how things are moving, like better or for worse. We have delivered the results to the municipality of Geracastra.
Excuse me, Dr. Mamani. I think the sound is a bit the cracking. Maybe you can try to switch off video, that we would have a bit better sound. Can we try?
Can you hear me better now?
Now, yes, I think so.
Okay. Good. So the findings from this study were affecting the conservation strategy by the Institute of Monuments of Culture, and also other big projects in the city, like the integrated urban tourism development project financed by the World Bank. Also, the restoration of the monuments of the city were definitely affecting not only the single buildings, but the whole landscape, the whole historic landscape, and let's say the whole view of the city. That's why, together with this study, we were also implementing some pilot projects on emergency of some ruins in order to extend their life, but also to show the potentials and what are the effects actually of the potential of these buildings, but also the effect they might have if they are in the whole historical urban landscape, if they are disappearing after a year. Fire, as I mentioned before, is one of the biggest threats of the city, and almost every year we have one man lost because of fire, and awareness is really lacking in the city. It has experienced many times this risk. The landscape and the way the city is built with the narrow streets and hilly neighborhoods, it makes also very difficult for fire trucks to enter and to intervene. So when a city will into fire, then it is most probably completely burned down. That's why we developed, we found actually a solution that was hidden within the buildings, and having water assistance in the houses is something that is applied in many historical cities, and in Geracastra, because people didn't have natural water resources, were collecting water in order to use for their everyday needs. but nowadays, because of the water supply, this cisterns and this water, it's not used anymore. So our idea was actually to convert these cisterns into and to connect this water and to be used from the owners to extinguish the fire in case it happens, but also to connect with the system, with the general system of the city, and these hydrants to be used also for the fire departments, because for them it's very difficult to approach all the buildings. Beside the project that the organization is implementing, there are also other big actually the last years in the city. One of these
Excuse me, Dr. Mamani. I think the sound is very difficult to understand. Maybe we can try to, yes, you already switched off the video. Maybe maybe we can keep switch off, the video switched off.
Video, okay.
Yes, only the video, of course, we need to.
Okay, great.
Have a, yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, I'll try.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, a bit better, I think.
A bit better. Okay. The Restoration of Bazaar was one big project actually implemented 2 years ago and financed by the Albanian American Development Fund, which really actually changed the shape of the core of the historical city. And you can see the photos today, but also brought a lot of, let's say, new shops and activities in this area that was left empty for many years. The Integrated Urban and Tourism Development Program is the largest program actually funded by the World Bank, but that includes also the Geracastra is one of the 4 cities where they are investing, and the objective is to improve the urban infrastructure and to promote tourism in these historical cities. Part of this program is the system of museum in Geracastra that CHWP also was like one of the partners preparing the proposal, and the idea was actually to see the whole historical center as an open museum and to be able to we have identified different historical buildings that have a potential and try to connect like the visitors with the buildings, but also with the people living inside and giving them opportunities to use these buildings actually for some economical profits for themselves. The addressing the emergency stabilization of the castle was also another project that is invested by the World Bank, and but besides identifying the risks that the building itself is facing, we as a team actually have been going more in depth and trying to identify the potential of the castle and how this can be used. So mobility this is the last slide. Mobility is actually one of the biggest problem, and of course we have there were several projects trying to address these issues, and currently we have a bypass that is built under construction, but actually that is not really approved still by UNESCO, and this is actually a huge problem that might impact the outstanding universal values of the city. To conclude, like the historical city is facing different problems and challenges, and a lot of projects actually have been attempts to address these issues. However, the progress that is made, we must be very careful in order to be able to manage all these changes, but also to be able to maintain the historical, let's say, content of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mamani. Since we are a bit behind the schedule, without further comment, I would like to invite Dr. Vella from the ICOMOS Malta and the Deputy Director of the Malta College of Art and Technology.
Without further ado, my name is Valletta. I am a conservation architect. Today, I'm very excited to be able to share with you what the example of Malta. Basically, Valletta is can we go forward, please? Valletta is a World Heritage City. It's as you can see from the photograph, is better. No, it's going too fast now. So as I just been saying, what is unique about the city of Valletta is that it's a very compact city. It has over 300 monuments. It was originally inscribed in 1980, and then the boundaries were extended more for technical reasons in 1992 to incorporate also the bastions. This is a contemporary photograph of Valletta. As you can see, it's quite contained, the city, very rigid town planning. It's basically a war machine, a fortification. It's a defended fortified city. What would also be maybe interesting to note, even from this photograph, is the kind of typology, the urban blocks, and also the fact that the skyline is quite preserved, except for a few buildings on the right-hand side of the photograph, where there are some churches, which were built over time.
Dr. Vela, your slides are not moving. We can only see the opening slide.
Yes, that's the one I intended you to see for now. Thank you.
Okay.
You're seeing a bird's eye view of photograph. Yep.
No, we are able to see the title slide where you have the name of the presentation.
Okay. So I will have to stop sharing, and I will have to ask you to do it for me. I will raise my hand like this. You know that I need you to change slide for me. Thank you. Okay. Right. Yes. So this is my third slide. This is a bit of historical background about Valletta, because it's very important to understand the reason, the context, why it was built. To the left-hand side, there is a photograph. There is an image from the Vatican galleries, basically of the Great Siege of Malta of 1565. Whereby the Ottoman Turks had raised siege to the island. You can see to the right hand side of the photograph two small cities where there's kind of star hitting them with the cross of the Knights of St. John. So basically, Valletta was originally just a promontory, an empty landmass, but it carried very strategic importance. With regards to the main harbors of Malta. So basically, right after the siege of 1565, when the Knights managed to overcome the odds, basically they decided to build the city. To the right-hand side, there is an image showing the city, how it was developed round about the 17th century. So it's pretty much a promontory, a finger to the. It has water all along three sides, so to speak, except for the landward side, whereby there is that defensive wall. Can we please move forward? Next slide. Right, and this is the plan which documents the inscription of Valletta in 1980. As you can see, the boundary in 1980 is the one shown in red. It was further extended in 1992 to include other parts of the fortification. So basically, it extended further. What would be interesting to observe about the plan of Valletta is that it's based on a very rigid grid iron pattern. So typical of many cities. Of course, there was a purpose for that. It was, as I said before, it was a war machine. So the idea was to be able to move cannon and soldiers easily. So we do not have the typical European so to speak, develop the city, whereby the urban blocks would be based on contours, but rather an imposed grid-iron layout on the land. What happens is, to the northeastern part of the image I'm showing, the land dips slightly. So basically what happened was that the knights, for the sake of expediency, did not level or flatten the whole promontory, but rather left the existing contours and just imposed this grid pattern. So though on plan you see these very straight lines, in actual fact you have quite changes in altitude between one part and the other end of the same street. This physical problem, this created a physical problem even when housing is concerned, and I'll come to this later. Towards the center of the drawing, I can't show with my slider, there are two bigger, darker blocks, urban blocks. The first, the lower one, is the Cathedral of St. John, which I'll be discussing later, and the other one is the Grand Master's Palace. It will be also important to note the darker blocks, the smaller darker blocks on the plan. They basically show the other important palaces or auberges where the knights used to live in. So, and we also will come to that later on. Next slide, please. So this is an image representing perhaps the most important building within the city, which is St. John's Co-Cathedral. Again, it's built on late Renaissance proto-Baroque layout, obviously decorated over time. And what is interesting about the church, apart its decoration, which obviously has a lot of architectural importance, is also the fact that it houses two of Caravaggio's paintings. Caravaggio, I'm sure you've heard the name before, was a very important painter towards the end of the 17th century, and he basically has become a knight for other reasons, but two of his most important works are actually housed inside the cathedral. And why am I saying this? Because obviously they take pride of place even when it comes to the museological aspect of the cathedral to attract crowds. Perhaps also importantly about this Caravaggio painting is the fact that if you look at the painting on the right hand side, there's the St. John being beheaded, there is blood coming out of his neck. The artist has signed his name in that blood, and so it's the only signature existing for Caravaggio, so to speak. Okay, so it also becomes important for art historians also to visit the place. So basically, this cathedral is a center of attraction within the main core of Valletta. Above, I put down the criteria for Valletta's inscriptions. This is the first one, as I mentioned, that it's basically a late Renaissance manierist urban plan, and obviously the way it's situated, the way it's sited, makes it important even for those who want to study military history. And obviously these fortifications have been preserved, luckily, I would say, over time. Next slide, please. Other important buildings within the city are, as I mentioned before, the auberges or the palaces. The auberges were the hotels where novitiates or young knights used to stay before they were financially independent enough to build their own house. I'm mentioning this because obviously over time the use of these auberges, the use of these hotels changed. During later periods, they were transformed into government offices or museums. I would say maybe nowadays transforming them into museums might not be the best option, both for the collection and the building themselves. Nevertheless, the most important ones have, to a certain extent, remained government property. All the other palaces, all the other smaller properties have gone through a huge transformation. What happened that over periods, the larger buildings were, as the previous presenters commented before me, subdivided into smaller residential units. So you would have a palazzo, think of a Renaissance palazzo, this palazzo being chopped up into various residences, obviously to make it manageable to live in, because nowadays they would be too big to live in. With the current trends, these palazzi are being returned into homogeneous buildings, and obviously being used for guest houses, Airbnb, boutique hotels, and whatnot. Okay, so basically, I would say it's the least of all evils, whereby the best way to be able to preserve these huge buildings is to convert them into these very small boutique hotels. And visitors can have the same experience of living in an old city, living in a historical building, with obviously the limitations and the beauty that kind of living might bring. Criteria number 6 for the description of Valletta is that it's obviously tied very much to the history of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem. Malta has been so much tied to the history of the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem that nowadays people know them as the Knights of Malta. And the symbol, the 8-pointed cross of the Knights of Malta, has also become part of our national symbol. Okay, so you can also think of the branding that kind of connection brings with it. This is the Grand Master's Palace, and nowadays it's been converted to act as the Presidential Palace. So really the function has remained the same, it's just that ownership has changed. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the different cultures in Malta, I think you would appreciate its location. Malta is right, one of the furthest south borders of Europe, just between Sicily and North Africa, Tripoli on one side and Libya on the other. So really, it's the end where Europe ends, so to speak. Even in our contemporary times. It has also obviously been part of all the trade routes and all the empires that have tried to conquer it as a stepping stone for their other purposes. To the left-hand side, and I included these cartoons more for interest. Okay, I'm not making any political statements over here. The cartoon on the left-hand side shows Great Britain, represented by the bulldog, grabbing the bone called Malta away from Napoleon, who is portrayed here, of course, as the antagonist, the monkey dressed in uniform. On the right-hand side, there is Malta trying to be scrubbed off by Hermann Goering and Mussolini. Mussolini was the Italian dictator at the time, carrying a bucket of soap, and Goering is on his knees trying to scrub it off the map. And you know who at the background is being angry that Malta is still existing. Why am I saying this? Because obviously these cultures have brought, this intersection of cultures have brought a lot of, have had their say, even the way the country has developed, but also specifically Valletta. Okay, so this is actually part of our history, this is part of our culture, the crossroads of these various empires. Next slide, please. So just to give you briefly a bit of background to this as well, the Knights of Malta were here throughout the 16th century, 17th century, and the late 18th century. Okay, so the French replaced them in 1798. The French were in Malta for a couple of years. Napoleon was here for a few months, but obviously left his troops behind on his way to Egypt. And thereafter Malta capitulated and became a British protectorate and eventually a British colony up until 1969. So like India, we are part of the Commonwealth of countries of ex-British colonies. Obviously, the British have left also left their imprint on Valletta to the left-hand side, you can see this massive neoclassical or neo-baroque opera house. And to the left and to the right-hand side, you can see its destruction during World War II. So basically, World War II left a good number of monuments in Valletta destroyed. And perhaps the way we built, the use of huge limestone blocks, you can see them in the foreground of the photograph on the right. The size of those blocks prevented buildings from collapsing the way they would have done elsewhere in Europe when they were built of brick. You can see the opera house partly demolished. So what happened there after the Second World War was that there was a huge program of rebuilding, of regeneration. And I'm quoting over there on the integrity that a huge portion of these buildings have been obviously preserved. Next slide, please. Okay, so why am I saying all this? Here is shown a plan of reconstruction for Valletta, a plan which shows the city how it have been intended to be rebuilt after the Second World War. The darker blocks are the blocks which had been demolished or bombed out rather, and which were subsequently reconstructed. Next slide, please. Here I come to this slide, which represents the direction taken from the couple of slides previously, showing the demolished city gate, part of the demolished piazza behind city gate. Now it's a piazza. Over there, it's just being reconstructed, and out of the photograph of the left are the ruins of the Royal Opera House. So what happens is in the 1950s, there was a huge program of regeneration, not as large as the one which happened in the year 2000. The idea was to try to re-establish this missing lacuna in the city, which was the Royal Opera House and the area surrounding it, including City Gate. To the left-hand side, you have an image showing, a photograph showing, sorry, I'll come to the next slide. To the left-hand side, you have an image showing the City Gate being rebuilt, obviously in a very modernist, contemporary, some may say fascist also style. And to the right-hand side, there is a failed project for the recreation of this huge opera house, which fortunately or unfortunately never materialized. You can also make out where those steps are, the kind of, not steps rather, but lines on the paving, the main thoroughfare which connects City Gate. So we're looking at City Gate from behind to the rest of the city. So next slide, please. So one way of regenerating the city, and I apologize for the long introduction to arrive to the Hul concept, was to keep Valletta as the capital city, but to remove offices of central government offices away from it, and just keeping the bare essential functions of government. So basically, the government had taken this bold decision that Valletta, to remain the capital city, should have at least a small symbolic representation of government in it. So Parliament, the office of the Prime Minister, and the offices of the President of the Republic. So those three main offices. All the other offices would be removed from Valletta and be located elsewhere. A reason being that obviously there'll be less issues with transport, parking, roads, infrastructures, etc. Those buildings would be liberated. They can be used for other purposes, as I mentioned before. They could be given back to the people, so to speak. And of course, I would presume government offices need to function within their own spheres. They don't really need to be located within a historic building. What happened was that in 1980, originally Renzo Piano had been invited to design the House of Parliament. However, nothing came of the project. However, towards the left of 2005, yes, this parliament building was constructed over here. So this is a view of the parliament building by Renzo Piano, using the same textures, using the same stone blocks, stone material, sorry, of Valletta. Next slide, please. I will wrap up very soon, so I'm towards the end of my presentation. So this is the other side. So this is the land front of Valletta. Towards the left, you can see the original bridge built by the knights with the missing part where the drawbridge would have been. And to the right-hand side, the city gate built by British in Victorian times with this double gateway, which had been bombed out during the war. Renzo Piano's proposal towards the left was to actually not rebuild the city gate, but to kind of just arrange this lacuna and to open up Valletta as a city for people to be to welcome people, so to speak. So the new gateway is not really a gateway to keep people out, but it's more like a landmark to actually invite people to enter into the city. Next slide. Of course, the city wouldn't exist without tourism. So one of the main problems we face concerning even the scope of this Hul lecture is mass tourism. Right now, we get quite a huge number of tourists who arrive in these cruise liners. And so Valletta is injected daily, at least in pre-COVID times, with thousands of tourists who arrive on a daily basis and then leave the next day to be replaced by other tourists. So this is part of the problem that we're facing. And what happened was that we created these other facilities to try to kind of spread out tourism from just focusing on the city. Next slide, please. But also to try to regenerate and try to inject more interest within the city itself, new museums, interpretation areas that obviously will also allow the neighboring communities to thrive better, and both people living there and shops, because obviously you will understand that the number of shops in Valletta are quite numerous, would be able to thrive. Incidentally, Valletta, I forgot to mention this, is nowadays it's practically impossible to be able to insert a new office block in Valletta. Even a private company is discouraged to have their offices in Valletta. So Valletta is just shops, restaurants, museums, and houses, which at the end of the day is probably the best mix, the best trade-off to have. This is a project for St. John's Cathedral to widen the scope of the museum. Right now, for the time being, it's between shelves or moving forward. Next slide, please. So another way to try to get Valletta on the map, and these are the last couple of slides. I'll stop at 15, so I won't take more of your time. So one of the ways to put Valletta on the European map or international map, besides inviting international architects to contribute to design of actual buildings, is this social aspect. In 2018, Valletta was nominated as European City of Culture together with Leeuwarden in Holland. So and these are some photographs showing the festivities and the activities that happened in that time. Okay, so think of all the contemporary technology, of all the activities for different generations of people, to have the city working as the European Capital City of Culture. Of course, this left its own spin-off. So new shops, new areas, regeneration of fabric, of as I mentioned before, of these boutique hotels, etc. So this is another way of actually putting the city on the map to make people familiar and to bring it to the attention of surrounding countries and perhaps the rest of the world. Next slide, please. Also, you can see towards the left-hand side, as spin-offs after this Valletta 2018 activity. So we're like 3 years later. Is this regeneration? You can see those dilapidated buildings towards the left, those wooden balconies. this photograph is taken from the roof of what is called the Valletta design cluster. So basically what happened was that this government organization took over the old abattoirs, okay, the old abattoirs where animals used to be slaughtered, and they have been converted into this design cluster for artists to be able to use and to avail themselves of. So the idea was to inject young people and young artists to be able to come back to Valletta and use Valletta as workshops, as their own crafts places, as their own artisan shops, etc. To the right-hand side, I am advocating in Valletta, like Manuel Theatre, for instance, in this case, a Baroque building is being opened up by this Valletta cultural agency, and the young people and artists, whatever, are being invited also to collaborate or to present contemporary productions of or even original productions. So again, this is a way of pulling the younger people or injecting Valletta with young artists. Okay, so I think that's the end of my presentation. Can I see the last slide, please? I'll just leave it here. This is part of this is liberal taken from the inscription as a World Heritage Site. I'll just leave it here for the presentation as well for future reference. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't overstay my time. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Good evening. And thank you very much, Dr. Jeevan Vela, for your excellent presentation on city of Valletta. It's almost 6 in the evening from India. So we now move to a discussion, panel discussion from a group of panelists who are officials of national government, experts from ICOMOS, from the local government, Indian officials, and mayor of city of Kochi. So on behalf of CEPT University and the partner organization, NIUA, UNESCO, and Metropolis, I would like to welcome you all again to this discussion, panel discussion. As you have just a quick recap, although we have exceeded our earlier time, but I would like to have a quick recap of the discussion and the presentation that we heard for the benefit of our panelists. As Juni introduced, gave us a background about HUL, the journey so far. And we had 4 excellent presentations, starting with Paramaribo by Dr. Rand. Then Dr. Ona presented us Bukhara, a very excellent initiative of mapping efforts in the city of Bukhara. Dr. Mamani gave us a kind of a very interesting overview of the work which is being done at Berat and Geocastra in Albania. And finally, Dr. Vela presented us the effort of heritage management of city of Valletta. And now I invite the comments and responses from some of the experts and officials, Indian officials. The challenge of historic urban landscape, as you know, because if you look at Paramaribo, the historic town is about 20 hectares. If you look at the historic town of Bukhara, the spread spatial sprawl, we are talking about 216 hectares. The Geocastra and Berat together, the property described is about 58 hectares. And city of Valletta is close to about, as Dr. Vela mentioned, it's about 56 hectares. And if you look at an Indian context, the spread of Jaipur inscribed property is close to 700 hectares. And Ahmedabad is about 535 hectares. So all of us can appreciate the scale and also the population and density. And as we recollect what Dr. Rand mentioned about the challenges of management of historic cities, and he mentioned, I like the term, he said, it's much better to manage the monuments than the historic cities. And that's the challenge that we'll be discussing, and also the opportunities, not only the challenge, how we look at the opportunities of historic urban landscape and localizing in the context of India. And we have some excellent panelists to discuss with this, beginning with Mr. R. Srinivas, who is a very senior planner, Town of Country Planning Organization, Government of India, and also As some of you recollect, that first model heritage guidelines was also issued by his organization. We then had Professor Sanghamitra Basu. Professor Basu is a member of National Scientific Committee of ICOMOS India, and she has been also a teacher of Indian Institute of Technology for several years. Our next speaker is Mr. L.P. Patnaik, who is the planning member and person presently in charge of 2 heritage engagement of city of Puri and Konarak in Odisha. And finally, we have Dr. Rajan, who is the director of Center for Heritage and Development on Kochi, and Mr. Anil Kumar, who is the mayor of Kochi, who will be joining us from Bangalore. So I would first request our speakers, panelists to quickly introduce their work and also some reflection of the presentation we saw, some of these very interesting lessons that we saw in these 4 different contexts. So I first invite Mr. Srinivas. Since we have already exceeded the time, I would request all my panel members to be brief in their comments. Over to you, Mr. Srinivas.
Absolutely, absolutely, Professor Shashwat. Thanks for your kind introduction. And in fact, you mentioned about model heritage regulations and the way we drafted. In fact, it was in consultation with UNESCO. And the highlights of model heritage regulations includes, how the urban local bodies or urban development authorities should go for listing of, heritage buildings. And also the model heritage guidelines also gives a methodology for grading of the listed buildings and heritage precincts. And also development controls have also been included in the regulations. Most of the states, barring northeast states or the hill states, most of the states have incorporated the provisions of model heritage regulations in their respective building bylaws and also development control regulations. But what could be the learnings from the presentation? I was very much impressed, when we, in fact, the participants were discussing about the carrying capacity. That's very much important because heritage, we have to, connect with the tourism, and and Indian heritage cities and other, cities with the, religious importance, we see, peak time, influx of the tourists. So accordingly, we have to, ensure the carrying capacity analysis, especially when we go for plan for heritage cities or heritage areas. Secondly, I think one of the presentation highlighted, I think it was an Albanian town where this speaker very nicely highlighted about the risk assessment. That's very much important. What we feel, you're all aware of, the impact of climate changes, especially in India, so many cities have got, flooded, and the latest one, Chennai, next 2 days are, they have forecasted a very heavy rainfall. So what we feel that heritage buildings or built heritage are extremely vulnerable to the climate change. So accordingly, we have to, we have to ensure steps to ensure resilience to the, built heritage. Lastly, I would like to, focus, from Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India, we have been impressing upon the, all the state governments, all the provincial governments, that they should mainstream heritage management in their master plan process, and we are specifically focusing on that master plan must include a chapter on heritage conservation, and at the same time a provision for heritage management should be inserted in the Town and Country Planning Act. Yes, we have to also go through the zoning regulations, especially that what kind of uses and activities are going to be permitted within the heritage precincts. Another important point is adaptive reuse as the effective strategy to conserve heritage. Now, yes, some of the provincial governments are also taking steps towards developing the greenfield town. Now, once we talk about the greenfield town, Now, how we are going to, take into consideration the heritage management or heritage conservation? Some of the greenfield towns may have Abadi areas, may have certain villages which may have, built heritage, So how we are going to, tackle, that's very much important. Yes, the previous presentation mentioned about issue of mobility and how heritage areas or heritage buildings, how we are going to, especially the inner core areas, are we going to pedestrianize, our inner core city areas? Just like, the latest example is, Chandni Chowk area, where a lot of pedestrianization has already been done. Secondly, yes, how we are going to, look into the, the incentive zoning or the, transferable, transferable development rights. Often the plans provide for affairs which are generally much less than the existing. So this may become a disincentive, but how we can really work for heritage TDR, that's, we are in discussion with the city authorities, and we hope that cities in India will definitely work more for the heritage management. These are my few points, which...
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas. You quickly pointed out for some of the national government initiative for a kind of a model heritage regulation, and also the framework for local area plan for urban redevelopment. And that's a very important initiative for heritage redevelopment of local area plan, and some of the cities are attempting to try out. The third aspect which you mentioned, and that's very important, and I would like to also at the end would like to request some of our international speakers to about the fiscal incentive for, that you talked about, this transfer of development rights, how to bring finance for urban redevelopment. I think this three very important points that you have raised. I will come back to request our speakers from Paramaribo and Bukhara and Valletta as well as Albania to share their experience. Now I invite Professor Sanghamitra Basu to give your comments and feedback on this presentation, and also as you see how Indian cities can take these lessons forward. Over to you, Professor Basu.
Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay. Am I audible?
Yes, very much.
Okay. So see, what we have seen is that the historic landscape, urban historic landscape, is actually the management of change. And it has been rightly pointed out that beside monuments is the fabric, open spaces, activities. So it's a very dynamic thing. And what we see in Indian cities is that many of these structures are in private ownership, and quite a few of them may not be heritage structure itself. This is one. So how do we take care of that? So, and then the economics, which has been rightly pointed out, because the multiple owners and the people do lack fund for maintenance. So as you have rightly pointed out, the TDR. So once we mention the TDR, once on one side, we have to talk about the giving areas, the areas which we have a lot of heritage structures, and the areas of the zone which are the receiving TDRs, because otherwise it may have a very negative effect on the overall urban development. And this brings us to the question that heritage areas or generally what we find them, it's a part of a larger cities, it has to be integrated with the development plan, as it has been rightly pointed out, the local area plan, and which has to be a statutory document. And the ones we mention about this development plan in integration of the heritage area then becomes the critical issue of the delineation of that heritage area, which has to be based on a rational basis. And the multiple values and multiple stakeholders are there. We have trying the Bhubaneswar and Cuttack master plan. In Bhubaneswar itself, there we identified 7 or 8 heritage areas. Each one is a very different, including the old Bhubaneswar area. So on a GIS platform, plot-wise informations were mapped out on thematic layers, and then the 7 heritage areas, and each one role. That because the heritage areas, they have probably outlived their old heritage role, and then the new role in the development. For example, in Bhubaneswar, the old heritage area city was visualized as the cultural hub and of the entire Bhubaneswar, which is a modern city. And this is one thing. And then the surrounding or adjoining open areas were visualized as the tourism and the new development for cultural activities, and which is a part of the overall master plan or development plan and land use control plan. And this only can make it possible. And for example, Shishupalgarh in Bhubaneswar is a huge archaeological site under A site, but there are habitation there. So the people have their needs, aspiration, and other, and they do come up. So we have to take care of that. That's why I say the Bhubaneswar, I think we have been partly successful with the development plan. It cannot be taken as a separate thing. I would also like to mention the Shantiniketan, Vishwabharati area, where is a buffer area of the municipalities and a Khowai, which is a landscape area. And there are also villages, almost 30 villages, which provides the buffer zone, which was on a tentative heritage list. Now it has gone to the UNESCO for nomination this year. So the main issue there was the tourism, and the tourism was creating a lot of pressure on the natural heritage of Khowai. And what is Khowai and what is the delineation of the Khowai becomes a very crucial issue. So what we did, these are all done when I was part of the IIT Kharagpur as a faculty, as a teamwork. So what was very necessary, we prepared a GIS-based thematic layers. And based on that, we could identify, because it has to be rational, because people will come and ask you why my house is within the heritage area, why the other person's house is not within the heritage area. So it has to be very, very rational, transparent, and in dialogue with the people. So there we were quite successful, at least to delineate rationally. And also, while we are declaring or delineating or visualizing the overall development, it was done in such a way that the development is away from the Khowai area, not putting pressure on the institute and other through the land use development control plan, which is, so that's the future direction has to be taken care of. I would also like to mention a Kuch Bihar, which is a West Bengal government's initiative for declaring it as a heritage town. Kuch Bihar is a royal family. There is not only palace, there are almost more than 100 heritage structures we have identified. And it is not the structures, this is the entire city, the streets, the water bodies. There are a lot of water tanks and the activities which is a part of that. So in that, we also had to identify and rationally delineated on a GIS thematic layers map, plot-wise information, and say that what will be the zonal, as we say, the local plan, what will be the local plan for each area, which will be the TDR receiving and TDR giving areas, and how it is development, and also take care of the preservation of areas. So these are and also the infrastructure development, which is very, very important. The road, the electricity, and the drainage system and the sewerage, people do understand that. So that becomes a very important part. And tourism will come naturally. I don't think we have to plan for that. We have to plan,
Okay, I
think these are the things. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Basu. And I think you made some very excellent point. One is about is managing the change, and the second aspect also how you link the heritage to the overall city development plan at different scale. And third point, which also you highlighted very important about the application of GIS and GIS based enabled tools to mapping this heritage, and the experiences that you shared. And I also see what Dr. Una mentioned about Bukhara, because Bukhara is quite a large site of 216 hectare and about 1,000 listed properties, which is very close to some of the Indian cities. I think a lot of similarity of that sort. So thank you very much, Professor Basu. I now move to one city government official who is managing the heritage close to one of the Indian eastern coast city of Puri or Konarak Development Authority, Mr. L.P. Patnaik. I invite you for your comments that what you saw, that 4 very interesting presentations vis-a-vis the way you are attempting to manage. You have worked in Bhubaneswar before. Now you are in charge of Puri and Konarak planning and as well as heritage area. So I invite your comment, Mr. L.P. Patnaik.
Thank you. Am I audible? Yeah. I am LP Patnaik, now as city planner of Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation, and also in additional charge of planning member, Puri Kudak Development Authority. As all of you know, Puri as well as Bhubaneswar, both are of heritage importance. And CDP for Bhubaneswar has already been prepared, and Dr. Sanghamitra Basu has rightly said that more importance has been given for the Puri, for the Bhubaneswar development, as heritage town Ekambra Khetra has been the core area where heritage development has been taking place. And there are now government, actually earlier there was no focus on development of heritage important sites. Now government of Odisha has come up with a new scheme, Avada. This is Avada is augmentation of basic amenities and development of heritage and architecture. This is a new scheme developed by the state government, and initially they have gone for an expenditure of 700 crores for development of Lingaraj temple, which is a heritage important temple. Mostly in heritage, once you come up to Odisha, most of the heritage sites are temple. And I would definitely say that instead of taking temples only as heritage, we should also involve this natural heritage, and built heritage means palaces are a lot of palaces are there, which has historical importance and is also of very old of 14th, 10th century palaces are also there in Odisha, but those has not been taken as into the fold of heritage zone. So this I think instead of making only temples, whatever Lingaraj temple, Konarak temple, and Puri temple, those three are the golden we say golden triangle. So these are the most important golden triangle of Odisha, where the tourism activities are prospering, and most of the footfalls are on those three places in Cuttack, Bhubaneswar, and Puri. In spite of that, also we should also bring natural heritage into this management plan, heritage management, and we should also promote this tourism activities on those natural heritage as well as built heritage. And as I already expressed, this Avada scheme, the Lingaraj temple around 70 meters of around Lingaraj temple has been acquired through this scheme, and 200 crores has been for land acquisition only, just to develop certain facilities like this has been open space, Jatri Nivas, this parking space has been developed, are going to be developed, and road improvement of 100 feet minimum that is going. You see, if any persons have visited earlier Lingaraj temple, mostly the only approach road might be 40 to 50 feet. On all other roads may be very less width. And this is all been acquired, and we are going for planning of Ekambra Khetra amenities and monuments revival action. This is Ekambra. So Ekambra plan has already been prepared, and 700 crores has been identified for that. Similarly, Puri town also, we have the Jagannath temple also, all around Jagannath temple, 70 meters from the Jagannath temple. We are going for acquiring the land, and most of the land has been acquired, and buildings has been demolished. But the claim of the now this is an issue also, it has come up, and we also think of how to resolve those issues, because those are the very old buildings that were existing for 200, 300 years within the 100 meters also from the temple, and that has been now demolished, and they are now claiming for rehabilitation and maximum FAR. As I can also put over here that how can you trade off the TDR, what Mr. Srinivas was saying, that TDR is a instrument to make this kind of resettlement of those persons, but actually they hardly have any land at present where they are being evacuated. And mostly this is a our planning and building standard rules. We have come up with 2020 rules, which provides FAR of 7. I think this is the highest FAR been given by the our state government in the country. I know nowhere I think 7 FAR has been given. So 7 FAR is the minimum, has the maximum FAR allowable in Odisha, in the state of Odisha now. So if a road is having 30 meter width, then he has FAR of 7. Now the Grand Road of Puri is definitely having more than 30 meters, and everybody is liable for getting other 7 up to 7 FAR. But due to the restrictions of this, due to this impact of this heritage plan or this, how can make that this possible to limit it within their, we have to trade it off. Whatever the FR they are eligible to get it, they can, how can this can be arranged? Because ultimately you can just, there is a tremendous pressure on development for going for higher FR. The skyline is going to be changed now because maximum FR is 2.75 in state, but now we are going for double and more than that. 7 means the entire skyline is going to change both in the entire state. In this state of affairs of development, how you think, how can we just control the development within the 300 meters or whatever the controlled area of development around a heritage site has to be again thought over. So I think these are some of the issues where we have to focus on for taking a action plan on management of heritage sites.
Thank you, Mr. Patnaik. You have brought forward some of the very real life challenges of the Indian city, some of the cities which are facing a lot of development pressure, and this how planning instrument can come in play and also maintain the balance of this heritage management. I now quickly move to the city of Kochi. I invite Dr. Rajan and Mayor of Kochi, Mr. Anil Kumar. I received a message that they were facing some problem to log in or they got logged out. Dr. Rajan, are you here with us? Dr. Rajan and City of Kochi. Okay.
I don't think they are here.
Okay, so I think we can just continue our dialogue and see whether they can be able to join us. I invite some comments from our international speaker, Dr. Rand, also Dr. Ona. I just got I see a message, Mamani has to leave, and Dr. Vela. Dr. Rand, you see these challenges, and you made a very interesting comments when you were presenting the case of Paramaribo, and you see the scale of the city that you talked about is about 20 hectares, and some of the challenges of urban areas.
Shaswati, I think Dr. Rand had to leave just 1 minute ago. I just received, so maybe we can.
No, I'm here.
He's here.
Oh, okay,
I see him. Yeah. So, Dr. Rand, I need your quick comments about some of the challenges that you heard, and we wanted your views on this. And then I'll come to you, Dr. Ona and Dr. Villa.
Completely different size. In Paramaribo is a very, very small city, but it's facing some of the same challenges as bigger cities. I see a lot of parallels between these different case studies, between Bukhara, Paramaribo, Valletta. You know, the city is either increasing pressure from population or decreasing. Also, you mentioned earlier, I think we have a deficit in our particular field about understanding the economic values and the economic issues. And I think we have to work a lot harder to understand those barriers in order to provide incentives for improving. And I think this is left out of the HUL guidelines that are currently being used. They're another 10 years old, but maybe there could be a revised version, and we could emphasize this point about understanding the economic.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Rand. And I think this is the challenge in particularly the cities in Global South, the understanding of heritage economics and financing of the heritage assets, and cities are struggling. And thank you very much for making this comment. I understand you have to leave, so I would thank you again for your comments. Yeah, and sparing your valuable time with us.
Of course, very beneficial. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Now I move to Ona, and you made some very interesting, example of Bukhara. And I was just looking at the scale, and you mentioned about 1,000 properties, 200 hectares of the inscribed site, and also you mentioned another very interesting: a city is beyond a kind of list of monuments, and also that mapping, know what you understand, what you have, And I see this is a very excellent proposition. And for cities like India, we're still struggling to understand our heritage assets which are non-monument in nature, because these are all part of our day in and day out living. And for example, we have two inscribed city scale property in Ahmedabad, which has 535 hectares, close to about 3,000 properties. Jaipur is about 700 hectares, very similar amount. So, Una, I think that experience from Bukhara and what takeaways from cities in India.
Yes, so thank you. It has been an interesting discussion, and especially to see that we all have, regardless the scale, we have the same issues. One of the topics, and actually it's more than 4,000 houses that we survey, without the monuments and other, features that we have acknowledged. One of the main or relevant topics that I heard from the discussion is the adaptive reuse. Bukhara is still vibrant, people living there, but clearly is changing because of economic an economic approach. So hotels are coming more, restaurants are coming more in private houses, and this is really difficult to control. I won't talk about incentives because it's something we're still quite far away in this example of Bukhara, but awareness has been our way to make sure people understand the value of their houses where they're living, and trying to implement more strong policy in that sense. I think what we need to do also is a combination of tools. And there's one of the tools I've been working with for many years is the heritage impact assessments. This is a topic that it hasn't been really discussed today, and it's probably another topic that I suggest it could be discussed in a different webinar. But the heritage impact assessments are a preventive and proactive tool that assess the impact of a project to heritage. And this, it's been becoming widely used, especially when we have to find a compromise between tourism and conservation and cultural heritage. So I think I invite everyone to take a look at this tool. It brings also stakeholders together. It brings multidisciplinary and multi-institutional teams. And I think this could be a way forward to understanding which way to go, aside, of course, to understanding what do we have, and all these other tools such as the GIS and all the digital technology. Just it's important, as I said, not to get lost with technologies, but clearly select the appropriate methodology and tool.
Great, thank you, Una. I think you made very important points, and particularly the aspect of HIA, Heritage Impact Assessment. And I have my colleague, Professor Jigna, who is in the call, and she has been spearheading some, HIA kind of assessment in some of the urban context in India. And I'm sure that, your recommendation would be very useful to take it forward in some of our contexts. I know Mamani has left because I wanted to ask her about the disaster risk aspect, which she was highlighting. Now I move to Dr. Vela. You're managing a kind of a series of adaptive reuse. Your images came out. So what is this aspect of how you manage in terms of finance and also balancing the gentrification aspect of tourism that are influencing heritage center? Dr. Vela, you are muted.
I try to unmute myself. Yes. I actually also have a question which I want to answer in my reply, so I'll try to combine both together. Somebody has asked me, as you said, the city has only shops, restaurants, etc. The core employment happens in these only, no offices, only the government secretariat. I think this ties a bit to your question as well. Valletta is a bit of a privileged city compared to what I've seen today as well. Privileged because obviously it was always meant to be a capital city. So, and that is always an advantage because you always have the focus. But being a capital city, it also has its downside, you know, because it's exploited. It's exploited beyond its means. I think the idea to move away offices wasn't per se just to move away the office. I think the idea is, as we are saying, that a Hul concept, and like everything else, a city is an ecosystem really, and everybody depends on each other. Traditionally, a city has people living in it, and people need to work. Do they work far away? Do they work in the city? So nowadays, with modern transport infrastructure, people leave the city to go to live elsewhere and work elsewhere. The idea is to try to excite people to actually remain living in the city and to have their own shops or to have their own studios or to have their own small home offices working from the city as well. I think maybe the pandemic has opened people's eyes to the idea that you can work from home. You don't need to move into an office. We use the Italian term called casa bottega. Casa meaning house, bottega meaning the boutique or small shop. You know, traditionally you have the person working downstairs and then lives above his shop. And I think Valletta lends very much to that kind of model. Of course, as I said before, it's not a question of removing or excluding offices. I think one has to be very careful in selecting what kind of offices. To give you an example, we have the law courts in Valletta. So lawyers have to practice in the law court. So most of these offices are actually lawyers' offices. You know, you don't necessarily need to have engineering offices or architectural offices unless they are really working in Valletta, where the work is limited because everywhere is already built. You know, but essential offices have to be there. And they also mentioned government offices. Why should the Ministry of Transport be located in Valletta? It could be located anywhere else on the island. But I understand the office of the Prime Minister, I understand the President of the Republic, because he needs to meet dignitaries and presidents from other countries. So it's like a way to greet people, you know. So one has to be very careful of not categorically excluding any type of function or work or development, but to be very careful how to select it. And I come back to the incentive part. The government does give incentives to people to restore their own homes, you know. So as long as they're on a specific street or specific materials, because you know traditional materials would be in wood or timber. Nowadays, people use plastic or aluminium for windows. So the government gives people an incentive to try to rehabilitate their houses, you know. But then also there's always a flip side to everything, because you try to do something good, but then something bad comes out of it. So people try to combine these houses together to not live in them, but to use them as a boutique hotel. Maybe a small house doesn't make sense, but a larger palazzo, which cannot be really managed, makes sense to be a hotel. So again, the question, the answer would be not to be categorical, but to actually break it down into easier ways of dealing with the problem, you know. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Birla. I think you very correctly answered. And what I see from the presentations of Dr. Rand, Dr. Ona, also Mamani and you, some of the challenges, what we had, the discourses around managing heritage, we see a lot of parallel, but also very encouraging to see some of the direction that are emerging, the lessons from Bukhara or Paramaribo, also Geracastra and Valletta. I think these are very, very important lessons to take forward. Since we have already exceeded our time quite a bit, so I'd not like to extend further. I would like to thank all our panelists, but joining from India, Mr. Srinivas from TCPO Delhi, because it's already late, around 7 o'clock to 6:45 in Indian time in the evening. Thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for being able to join us. Professor Sangamitra Basu, for your excellent comments and suggestions about mapping and also linking to the heritage assets to city development. Mr. LP Patnaik, thank you very much for highlighting some of the challenges, because you are at the, you are at the grassroots level, facing balancing the challenge of development versus conservation, and you highlighted the need for capacity and support and also the tools. How do you balance this? And I also must thank our international speaker, Dr. Rand, for your excellent presentation and also highlighting some of the challenges. And very importantly, and there has been several discourses, what we have been doing in India about the aspects of looking at heritage finance and heritage economics. And that has to be, looked at, and that debate needs to be furthered very, very importantly. Ona, thank you very much for presenting Bukhara, and we love the city, and hopefully once the COVID scare is gone, we find some time to visit Bukhara, because I see a lot of similarities, fantastic cuisine, both in Paramaribo and Bukhara, for this. Thank you, Dr. Vela, for able to join us and share the development in Malta. And friends, as you know, as a concluding remark, this is the journey, and I must thank Juni from UNESCO Delhi and Mr. Ajay Suri for NIUA Delhi, and also my colleague Jigna from CEPT Heritage Conservation Center, and colleagues from Metropolis for putting together this very excellent journey, very interesting journey of this webinar series on discoursing, understanding 10 years journey of historic urban landscape, and bringing some of the global experiences, and also, bringing together our local experts and speakers to understand what is the roadmap. We all know about the challenges of historic conservation, and particularly the scale. It's not only the heritage, number of heritage assets, because in global south, the cities are living sites, and old cities, particularly the historic cities, are also the sites for livelihood, inclusive and affordable housing, challenges of deteriorating infrastructure. I think one of the speakers highlighted in this discourses about I think Professor Sangamitra Bashu mentioned about deteriorating infrastructure. There are also challenges of the historic cities in terms of disaster risk, because many of these cities, the buildings are unsafe, and that challenges. So friends and colleagues, and thank you very much for joining and staying with us till so late. And we have, just to remind you, this is a 4 webinar series. Today is the opening series, and then we'll move forward from today. On 12th, we have some Indian cities presenting, and we invite all of you to join and make this webinar series a very interactive one and more dynamic one. And subsequently, we have 16th, we have another series of presentation about the experiences from Asian context and Indian context. And on 18th, we have the final concluding. So I would like to invite all of you, those and some of the speakers who could join us today. I see some of our colleagues from various global regions who could join us today. Please continue to stay with us, because we are in this journey of historic urban landscape. And there are a lot of answers, and there are a lot of more questions. And I think together we'll be able to make this journey together. And it's also our contribution to sustainable development goal, as you know, 11.4 SDG, focusing on these aspects of protecting heritage. So thank you very much, all of you, for able to join us. And namaste from India, and have a good evening for Indian colleagues, and good day for colleagues for joining from other parts of the world. I would now like to hand this over to my colleagues at UNESCO in case you wanted to make any announcement on this.
So thank you very much, Shashwat, and I apologize. I've got lost the connection. And of course, I think the only thing that remains is again to thank you all the audience, and then also speakers and the panelists, and also Shashwat for your wonderful moderation. And thank you all very much.